Hi, friends. This series is called But on Sunday, where I share some thoughts about scripture that's a part of the lectionary, and in many ways, I think correlates with some of the things I see happening in our communities. Now, as a reminder, I am going to talk about Jesus because that is the faith tradition that is a part of my life. But I truly and completely believe that our communal capacity for love, empathy, and kindness transcends my faith tradition and extends to yours. It also extends to you even if you aren't someone who ever identified with a faith tradition in any way, shape, or form. So, because of that, as you watch and listen, I want you to find yourself in the story. Think of the characters as living and breathing examples of people you might know or situations you might have experienced. Because all week long, we fight for one another. But on Sunday, we also remember. And so today we are going to look at John 9, where we encounter one of the most powerful healing stories in the gospel. Jesus meets a man who has been blind from birth. And the disciples ask a question common in the ancient world. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? They assume that suffering must be someone's fault. But Jesus refuses the premise of that question. He tells them they are asking the wrong thing. The man's blindness is not punishment or evidence of moral failure. Instead, Jesus sees an opportunity for God's work to be revealed. He makes mud, he places it on the man's eyes, and he tells him to go wash in a pool. And when the man returns, he can see. I mean, the miracle itself is remarkable, but the rest of the chapter reveals something deeper. The story becomes a question about who truly sees and who remains blind. A man who had been blind begins to see clearly, not just with his eyes, but in his understanding of who Jesus is. And meanwhile, the religious authorities who insist they have perfect spiritual vision reveal their own blindness. Now, this ancient story still speaks powerfully to our moment because it speaks heavily to this question of blame. The disciples' question sounds ancient, but it still echoes today. Whose fault is this? We still ask these questions whenever we encounter suffering. When someone struggles with poverty, people assume laziness. When someone becomes sick, others wonder what choices caused it. When communities face addiction or violence, society looks for someone to blame. Blame can feel comforting because it allows us to believe the world is orderly and fair. If suffering always has a clever cause, perhaps we can avoid it ourselves. But Jesus actually refuses that logic. He refuses to reduce human suffering to moral bookkeeping. That message matters in a society where many people are struggling just to get by. Families juggle multiple jobs while trying to afford housing and groceries and healthcare. And yet the instinct is often to assume that if someone is struggling, they must have done something wrong. But Jesus challenges that assumption. The question isn't who deserves suffering. The question is how God's work of healing and compassion might be revealed in the midst of it. One of Jesus's greatest gifts is that he was able to see people instead of their problems. And when Jesus encounters the blind man, he does something remarkable. He actually stops. The disciples see a theological debate. The crowd sees a beggar, but Jesus sees a person. He kneels in the dirt. He restores the man's sight. And this moment invites us to ask, who do we fail to see today? Our society is filled with people who have been rendered invisible. Unhoused people become background noise. Immigrant families become political talking points. Struggling communities become statistics. But Jesus never treated people as problems to be solved. He treated them as neighbors to be loved. And that kind of vision is desperately needed in a culture where political divisions often train us to see enemies instead of neighbors. Jesus calls us to look past labels and to see the humanity in one another. Now, after the healing, the story shifts. The religious authorities begin questioning the man who was healed, indicting him, you might say. Instead of celebrating the miracle, they focus on a technicality, that the healing happened on the Sabbath. They interrogate the man and they question his parents. But something interesting happens, because the man who was once blind also becomes increasingly bold. At first, he simply says, "The man called Jesus healed me." Later, he says, "He must be a prophet." And finally, he declares, if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. The formerly blind man becomes the clearest voice of truth in the story. And he's not a scholar or religious leader. He's just someone whose life has been transformed. I have to imagine, and I know because I've seen it myself, that often the people closest to suffering see reality most clearly. In our own times, voices calling for justice often come from those who have experienced that hardship firsthand. Their testimonies deserve to be heard. Now, these religious authorities refuse to accept what's happened, not because the evidence is clear, but because acknowledging it would challenge their authority. Spiritual blindness is rarely about intelligence. More often, it's about refusing to see what disrupts our assumptions. And at the end of the story, Jesus finds the healed man again and reveals himself to him. For the first time in his life, the man who once lived in darkness sees the face of Jesus and says, "I came into this world so that those who do not see may see, and those who think they see may become blind." This story turns expectations upside down. Those who admit they need healing receive sight. Those who insist that they already see and that they know everything clearly remain blind. Friends, spiritual sight and sight around what's happening in the world begins with humility. And when we open ourselves to understanding this transforming vision, we begin to see differently. We see people instead of categories. We render compassion instead of blame. And we bring forth the possibility of healing in this very broken and confusing world. May peace be with you.